Hey guys, welcome yet again to yet another home range poultry video. Now on today's video is going to be an awesome video because this is an age-old question that most of our viewers have always asked, and today we want to answer that question. Now what is that question? The question is, if I keep layers, am I going to make money? Now on today's video, that's exactly what we're going to delve at. Layers chicken are the kind of birds that we call the exotic birds that give us the eggs for consumption. Now these birds are primarily bred and designed to actually produce eggs, and of course the goal is to actually make sure that they give you peak production without you ever thinking about the meat element. So this is a specialized bird that actually produces eggs. Now this bird actually comes from one of the biggest producers, which is actually Sheva. The main breed of chicken for layers that you find in our market is what we call the Sheva Brown, and Sheva Brown is produced by Hendrix Genetics somewhere in the Netherlands. This bird is one of the most versatile and reliable layers birds, and you find that it actually produces a brown egg that is actually very ideal in the market and that actually has demand in the market. Now it has been specifically bred to produce a large volume of high quality brown eggs with strong shells and good internal quality. Now the Sheva Brown has a low feed intake combined with a high peak production and great laying persistency. For you as a farmer, the main thing that will actually make sense to you is about the money. Now most of these producers for these birds just tell you about the production parameters of the chicken and the qualities, but they never ever really get into the financials for you to really understand whether this is actually a business you want to venture into or not. And that's exactly where we come in. Now for me, I wanted to look at the numbers that have actually been provided by the primary breed producers. In this case, we're going to look at the information that is provided by Sheva Brown. And Sheva Brown is primarily the predominant breed of layers that is actually existent in the world. So you find that is actually the predominant one here in Kenya. So let's get into the numbers, guys. So for you to really understand this whole issue, I want us to break down our discussion into two sections. We're going to have one part that is going to discuss the expenses, and then you're going to have the other part that is going to discuss the income. Now, once we analyze and compare those two, we'll be able to tell whether we're going to be making a profit or a loss in this layers business. So let's start off. Now, if you visit the Sheva Poultry website, it will give you the parameters, all the parameters that you actually need for you to be able to do this calculation. Now, if you look at their website and look at what they're actually saying about the breed, most of this information that is provided here is actually sufficient to enable you be able to make a deduction. So to start us off, if you look at the section where they're talking about an alternative housing. Now, the reason why we are not going to go with the numbers for cage system is because cage system, first and foremost, is actually quite expensive, and very few farmers who actually do layers birds actually adopt the cage system. So most of them just keep the chicken in deep litter system, and this deep litter system is exactly what the Sheva Poultry website is referring to as the alternative housing. Now under this alternative housing, we are seeing all these parameters, and the main parameter I want us to look at is that they are saying on their website that this bird is going to have a laying period of between 18 and 100 weeks. Now 18 weeks is actually 4.5 months, and this is the reason why you're always told whenever you buy a layer chicken, always remember that this bird, you have to feed it and grow it all the way to 4.5 months. From 4.5 months is when you start seeing egg production, and not peak egg production. And by peak I mean you're not getting the maximum number of eggs from the chicken immediately at exactly 4.5 months. No. As you can see on their website, they're telling you that the age at 50% production will be at 150 days, and 150 days is actually 5 months. So that tells you that this chicken is going to start the first eggs at around 18 weeks, which is 4.5 months, but it's only at around 5 months when you're going to start getting around 50% of the hens being in production. And no matter how long you keep this chicken, the peak production or the maximum number of birds that will actually be in lay is actually at 95.5%. And these numbers are very, very important because this is actually what you're going to be using when you're doing a calculation. The other very important parameter I want us to notice that they are talking about when their eggs are housed, the total number of eggs that you're going to get within this laying period is 462 eggs. That's very, very important because you're going to calculate that to determine how much income am I going to get. And of course, you're going to assume crazy things like, there are no eggs that get broken, you're not going to eat a single egg. Let's assume all those crazy parameters for us to see whether you're going to actually make money. Now, apart from that, the other very key parameter you need to notice is on the issue to do with the average feed intake. And this is expressed in grams per day. If you look at the average feed intake in grams per day, you realize that it is 120 grams per day. And that's very, very important because that is actually what we will use when we will be calculating the cost of feeding this chicken. So let's get into it, guys. So from these parameters, we've been able to establish that the maturity of this chicken is exactly at 4.5 months. At maturity, this chicken you're being told is consuming 120 grams of feed. However, when it is a day-old chicks, day-old chicks usually consume 15 grams per bird per day. With those two figures of 15 grams and 120 grams, then it becomes very easy for us to be able to calculate the feed that this chicken actually consumed within the period of when it is a day-old all the way to maturity. And this is basically calculated by getting the average or the mean of the highest feed consumed, which is the 120 grams, and the lowest feed consumed, which is the 15 grams. And if you add those two and divide by 2, you get is 67.5 grams per bird per day. That's an average. Now we need to convert that to be the feed that the chicken is going to consume for the 4.5 months. So to do that, we just calculate and say it's going to be 67.5. We divide that by 1,000, then you multiply by 30 days, and you multiply that by the 4.5 months that this chicken is going to take to grow. And this will give you a total of 9.1 kilos. So in summary, this layers bird, for it to get from day-old chicks all the way to maturity, it's going to consume 9.1 kilos. The next thing that obviously you have got now to really find out is what are the prices for the feeds. Now for these layers birds, the recommended feed is always the Fugo feeds, which you find in the market that are produced by Unga here in Kenya. These are the best quality feeds that you can get for your layers chicken. These are the current prices as of 23rd of May. The current retail prices for a 50 kg bag of chick mash is 4,100. The 50 kg bag of growers mash is retailing at 3,250 or 3,250. And a 50 kg bag of layers mash is retailing at 3,300 shillings or 3,300. If you just do a simple sum, you say that if you total all these bags, this comes to 50 kg times 3, which is 150 kilos. And the total amount here is coming to 10,650. Where am I getting the 10,650? From adding 4,200 for the chick mash, adding the 3,250 for growers mash, and adding the 3,300 for the layers mash. That comes to 10,650. So if 150 kg of feed is costing you 10,650, the question then is, how much is 1 kg going to cost you? And from this calculation, you realize that 1 kilo is actually going to cost you 71 shillings. Let's go back to the feed that our layer bird has consumed. It has consumed 9.1 kilos. So for us to know the actual cost of feeding that bird, or the actual cost that this chicken has consumed in terms of cash, or the money that you are going to spend, you're going to multiply the 9.1 kilos, you multiply by 71 shillings, and this is going to give you 646 shillings. Please note, this is not the full cost of feeding. This is just the cost of feed. Now remember, when you're doing your chicken rearing, there are very many other costs that factor in. For example, your chicken may get sick, you may need to apply some antibiotic. You may need to boost their immunity and give them some multivitamins. You may need to do quite a number of these things that actually are not factored into the feeds. The industry standard is to actually use 15% cost of feeding to be a miscellaneous cost. And this is actually what is going to cater to the things that I've mentioned, including the cost of the vaccines, which is very, very important. This is factored in by the 15% of cost of feeding. So for our particular case, we've realized that the cost of the feed is 646 shillings. To calculate the miscellaneous cost that is going to cater to all these other additional elements like the vaccines, the multivitamins, and the antibiotics, we do just 15% of 646, which basically comes to 97 shillings. Now, apart from feeding and, of course, all these other miscellaneous costs that you've incurred, remember, guys, there is the cost of buying the day-old chicks. And the price in Kenya currently for the day-old chicks as of May 2023 is actually 120 shillings. So the full cost now of producing this chicken all the way from day-old all the way to when you're starting to see eggs, which is the 4.5 months, is going to be the 646 shillings. You add the 97 shillings for the miscellaneous cost, and you add the 120 shillings for the day-old chicks, and this is what, guys, is going to give you to be 863 shillings. So have that figure in mind. Now you know that to rear your layer bird all the way from 1 day old all the way to 4.5 months when you start seeing the eggs is gonna cost you 863 shillings. So guys, we have looked at the cost of rearing this chicken all the way to 4.5 months when you start getting the eggs. Now the next question is going to be during the laying period, because now we are talking of 4.5 months. This is the period that is now going to be generating for you money. Remember, all along you have been losing money. You have been feeding this chicken. So I want us to analyze and check, once this chicken starts going into production, are we going to make any money? Now, like we just mentioned earlier, the Sheva website actually tells you clearly that the laying period for this layer bird is going to be from 4.5 months to 25 months of age. That's a total of 20.5 months. The feed consumed during this period at maturity is going to be 120 grams of feed per bird per day. And this is very important because now this is the figure that you're going to use to multiply by the period within which this chicken is going to be reared, and you'll be able to find the total amount of feed in kilos that this bird is going to consume. So for our case, we're going to say 120. Remember, this is in grams, so to convert it to kilos, you're going to divide 120 by 1,000. So we'll say 120 divide by 1,000. Then we multiply by 30 days because there are 30 days in a month. And we've already established that this chicken is going to be fed for a period of of 20.5 months. So you multiply that by 20.5 months, and this will give you a total cost of 73.8 kilos. This is the total quantity that this layer bird is going to consume within the laying period. Now remember, within the laying period, it's only going to be consuming layers mash. So if we go back to our figures, we realize that we already established that as of May 2023, a 50 kg bag of layers mash is being sold for 3,300, the retail price. Now the next question to ask ourselves is that how much then is the 73.8 kgs of feed that these layers is going to consume? How much is that worth in terms of money? And this is very simple. We'll be able to say that is 73.8 times the 3,300, and then you divide that by 50, and that's what will give you 4,871. So in other words, this chicken within the laying period when it's giving you eggs, it's going to cost you 4,871 shillings in feeds. And remember guys, I'm talking about one bird, not 100, not 10, not 20, just one bird alone. Within the laying period, it will have consumed 4,871 shillings in feed. Remember, like we mentioned earlier guys, feeding is not the only cost. There's the issue to do with the multivitamins, any antibiotics in case the chicken gets sick, and any vaccines that may actually be required to be repeated as the chicken is growing. So for this, we'll use the industry standard, which is 15% of the cost of feeding. And if you do 15% of the 48.71 shillings, which is the cost of feeding, you get that this comes to 731 shillings. So in summary guys, to get the total cost of rearing this chicken all the way from 4.5 months to the entire 25 months of age, how will we get this? We will set the cost of feeding, which is the 48.71. We add the miscellaneous cost, which is 731 shillings, and this will give you 5,602 shillings. This is the cost of production of this chicken from 4.5 months to the 25 months within which it will be in production. Now remember guys, when we decided when you're starting this exercise, we agreed that you're going to separate this exercise into expenses side and of course the income side. So to summarize our expenses side, we are going to ask ourselves, what are the full costs from 1 day old all the way to the 25 months, which is the end of production of this bird? How much is it going to cost you? It's going to cost you the 863 shillings, which was the cost that we already arrived at when you're rearing this chicken from 1 day old to 4.5 months when it starts giving you eggs. And from 4.5 months all the way to the 25 months, it's going to cost you another 5,602. If you add these two figures, 5602 plus 863, it gives you 6,465. And that, guys, is the full cost of rearing this chicken all the way from day old to the end of production. So each chicken is going to cost you 6,465. Now, we have already looked at the full cost of rearing this chicken all the way from day old to 5 months. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the income side. And this is a very interesting side because this is the side that is now bringing in money for you. Remember, the expenses is all about you spending money. The income is all about you now receiving money. And it is the comparison of these two figures that will be able to tell you whether in that business you have made money or you have not made money. So let's look at the income. Now, first and foremost, we are going to go back to the website for Shaver and establish how many eggs did they say this bird is producing during that production period. And that summary has already been given to you there, which is 462 eggs. Now, once we've established that, the next thing that now we have got to establish for ourselves is, okay, I have 462 eggs. Question is, how much am I selling per egg? Now, for this exercise, I had to really establish what are the local prices that farmers are selling their eggs. And to do this, I just went to a website that is called gg.co.ke, and on this website, it is pretty easy for you to be able to establish prices because there are very many farmers here who are out there and they're just selling their eggs. And if you check on this website, you'll be able to see that most farmers are selling a tray of eggs or 30 eggs for 420 shillings. So let's use this figure because this is a farmer. So this farmer is selling a tray of eggs, 30 eggs for 420 shillings. If you divide that, it tells you that one egg, he's selling it for 14 shillings. Now remember, this farmer is you as a farmer. So you cannot go and use prices which are in the supermarket because you are not the supermarket. You are not selling as a supermarket. You don't have a supermarket. You have got to sell your eggs to others in bulk who go and distribute it to others. Of course, the other option that you have is to sell your eggs in retail, sell one piece at a piece to a consumer. Problem with that is that if you are talking of mass production, then there's no way you're going to be able to use that as a business model. You've got to use a model where you sell in bulk and people are actually able to retail those eggs and actually come back to you and buy in bulk. So for this particular case, this bulk farmer is selling his eggs at 14 shillings per egg. So the total sales that you will get from selling your eggs at 14 shillings per egg from the 462 eggs, and remember we're assuming that you're not eating any, none of them break. So the 462 eggs, you're going to multiply it by 14 shillings and you're going to get that the total is going to be 6,465 6,468 shillings. So the total sales that you're going to generate from selling the 462 eggs will be 6,468 eggs. If you've sold eggs, then remember, there's the bird itself, which now you can sell for meat. Now here in Kenya, these birds are sold as what we usually call the X layers. And X layers, people buy them and they eat them for meat. The good thing with X layers is that because it's a very aged chicken, of course, the meat is a bit tough and some people prefer that. So how much are X layers being sold for? Now, this was a very interesting thing to establish because I actually had to call local chicken dealers within my area to find out how much they are buying the X layers for. And I was able to establish that X layers currently in Kenya or in Kiambu County are actually being bought for 500 shillings. So you as a farmer who has X layers, you can actually dispose them off for about 500 shillings. If you're a farmer and you have X layers and you're wondering where you can sell these, one of the easiest ways is just for you to log in into gg.co.ke and you'll be able to actually sell your product there and advertise there, and you'll be able to find a market. Please let me make it clear that this is not sponsored content. This is just a site that I personally use when I want to dispose of product. Once you've sold your hen for 500 shillings and you've collected the money from the eggs, the question then is finally, what are my total sales? How much money did this chicken make for me? Now remember, in all these analyses, we have been looking at just one chicken, because this one chicken, the numbers that we get is what we are going to multiply by the number of birds that we actually intend to keep. So for the one chicken, the sales are only coming from the eggs, and from the eggs we are making 6,468 shillings. And of course, once we sell the chicken as an X layer, we are making another 500 shillings, and this gives us a total of 6,968 shillings. Guys, 6,968 shillings. Now, the question then that we need to ask ourselves, have I made a profit or have I made a loss? And to establish that, we are looking at an income of 6,968 shillings, and our cost of production or total cost for rearing this chicken was 6,465 shillings. So the profit that you have made, and remember, this is for a period of 1 year, 8 months, the entire 20.5 months of production. Okay, we are talking at now at the age of about 100 weeks. You've only made 6,968 shillings minus the 6,465 in expenses, and this only gives you how much? 503 shillings. Then let's look at a scenario where someone has kept about 1,000 birds, or you have kept 1,000 layers. So I know it looks like you've made over 500,000, because if you say 503, you multiply by 1,000, it gives you 503,000. But the question is, have you really made this money? Let's look at other expenses that you have actually not factored into your calculations, and that are actually going to change the entire scope, and that may make you actually think twice about this business. Let's start off. Now, if obviously you're going to keep 1,000 chicken, you're not going to be doing all this work by yourself. Chicken rearing is very labor intensive, especially for layers, and especially if you keep them on a deep litter system, because there'll be a lot of cleaning you need to do of drinkers, of feeders, of the poultry house itself. It's got to be swept and kept clean, and obviously the chicken needs to be fed, for water to be put in, and all these things are labor intensive. So meaning that on the very least you will need 2 employees at least. Now in Kenya, if you look at the minimum wage for employees, it stands at 15,120. So for the entire production period, from when your chicken get to your farm at day old all the way to when you face them out at 100 weeks or the 25 months, then it tells you that your cost of labor will be 2 employees times the 15,120 times 25 months. Do you know how much that gives you, guys? That gives you a whopping 756,000. Labor is not the only thing. There's other very interesting cost that you will incur, and this is what? Cost of transport or fuel. Now remember, guys, you will need to get your product to your market, whether it's someone buying in wholesale, whether it's a shop, whether it's a supermarket. The supermarket never comes for the egg from you. Once you factor in all that, then it tells you that there's actually a transport cost. Remember also, when your chicken are growing, you will need to buy the feed and bring it to your farm. All these are costs which few people actually factor them in, and that actually have a huge impact on your numbers. So let's look at this. So if you're talking of a project that is going to run for 25 months, and I'm going to give a very meager amount of only 2,000 shillings of fuel as far as transport is concerned per month, that tells you just with that meager amount, you're looking at another 50,000 expenditure on transport alone. Now I'm not going to factor in cases where you're hiring transport, because you do that and you put those numbers into play here, you'll be at a ridiculous loss. So the next other cost that is very critical that has not yet been factored into this production is the brooding cost. Remember, guys, when your chicks are day old, you have got to do brooding. Whichever way you do it, whether you want to use, gas, and by the way, gas is still the cheapest as of May 2023. We just recently did a brooding. If you look at one of our YouTube videos, you find for the 600 chicks, it actually costs us only around 25,000 to brood those chicks for the entire 1 month. So of course that translated to only about 40 shillings or 41 shillings per chick in brooding cost. Now for your case, you're going to do it for 3 weeks. So I'm not going to factor in 25,000, I'm only going to factor in about 20,000 in brooding costs. So the other very important additional cost, guys, that you have got to factor in is the issue to do with water. I have got to tell you in advance, chicken are thirsty animals. They consume a lot of water. Please do not do chicken when you do not have sufficient quantities of clean water. Now, assuming you have water that has been piped by the county, on average, we will pay about 1,000 shillings per month. So if you're talking of the entire production period for the 25 months, you're looking at 25,000 shillings in water alone. The costs that I've just discussed, the labor, the transport, the brooding, and the water, are what are actually called direct expenses, because these ones are going directly to the chicken. Direct expenses have gone to this particular flock. The monies have got to be recovered from this particular flock. What is the total cost of these additional direct expenses? Remember the labor cost? It was 756,000. The transport was at 50,000. The brooding cost at 20,000, and the water bill of 25,000. This gives you a total of 851,000. So when you did your income and you thought that you've made a profit of 503 shillings from your birds, you actually didn't. Why? Because from the 503,000 shillings that you collected from keeping their 1,000 birds, there are these other additional expenses that you incurred, totaling to 851,000. Meaning that in actual sense, guys, for your project, you have not made a single cent. In fact, what you have done is spent money and lost even more money. Why? Because your additional expenses are coming to 851,000. But guess what? The profit that you had realized from your birds, from your 1,000 birds, was 503,000. That means, guys, that by keeping your 1,000 layers, you have just given yourself a loss of 348,000 shillings. And guess what, guys? This is after a whole 2 years of putting in work into this breed. So, guys, my work today was to break down the numbers. I hope I've been able to help shed some light on this. So I hope that this information helps you make better decisions. Watch this video again, break down the numbers into your particular scenario for you to be able to understand whether you're making a profit or a loss. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to watch all our other videos, and we'll keep doing this, giving you the right information to help you make the right business decision.